The mountain town of Pinewood Ridge was dying, but not the way small towns usually fade. This death was sudden, violent, and accompanied by the sound of steel twisting and concrete surrendering to gravity. The old Riverside Apartments had stood for 60 years on the banks of the Clearwater River, a 5-story brick building that housed 32 families. Retired teachers, young couples, single mothers, veterans on fixed incomes. The kind of people who couldn't afford the new luxury condos sprouting up along Main Street. At 3:47 p.m. on a gray November afternoon, the building's northwest corner buckled, not from age, not from weather, but from something far more deliberate. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The collapse started on the 3rd floor, a deep groaning sound like a giant's death rattle, followed by the sharp crack of support beams snapping like matchsticks. In the span of 18 seconds, 3 floors pancaked downward in a thunderous cascade of brick, steel, and shattered lives. The dust cloud rose 200 feet into the air, blotting out the weak mountain sun, turning the riverside street into a gray, choking nightmare. By the time the dust began to settle, the northwest corner of the Riverside Apartments was a mountain of rubble. Twisted rebar jutted from the wreckage like broken bones. Water from ruptured pipes sprayed in thin arcs, freezing as it hit the November air. And somewhere beneath 40 tons of concrete and debris, people were screaming. Lieutenant Marcus Webb was 3 miles away when the call came through. He was sitting in a weathered Adirondack chair on the deck of his brother's cabin, a mug of black coffee cooling in his hands, watching the first snow of the season drift down through the pines. He had been on leave for exactly 4 days. 4 days of silence after 16 months of sand, heat, and the kind of violence that left scars deeper than skin. 4 days of trying to remember what peace felt like, trying to convince himself that the ringing in his ears was just tinnitus, and not the echo of explosions that would never truly fade. Marcus was 36 years old, though the lines around his eyes made him look older. He was built solid, 6 feet of lean muscle, hardened by years of SEAL training and combat deployments. His dark hair was cut short, military regulation even on leave, and his jaw carried the perpetual shadow of stubble. His hands, wrapped around the coffee mug, were scarred and calloused, the hands of a man who had spent a lifetime breaking things and occasionally putting them back together. Beside the chair, stretched out on the wooden deck, was Titan. The Belgian Malinois was a compact powerhouse of muscle and intelligence, 75 pounds of trained precision wrapped in a fawn-colored coat with a black mask. His ears were erect and mobile, constantly scanning for threats even in this moment of supposed rest. Titan was 7 years old, a veteran of 3 deployments, trained in search and rescue, explosive detection, and tactical assault. He wore his scars too, a notch missing from his left ear from a firefight in Kandahar, a slight limp in his right hind leg from a training accident that had ended his active duty career 6 months ago. They had both been retired from active service, Marcus medically discharged after taking shrapnel to his left shoulder and back. Titan retired when the injury made him too slow for the demands of frontline combat operations. But retirement had never suited either of them. They were operators without a mission, warriors without a war, and the silence of the mountains was louder than any firefight. The radio on Marcus's belt crackled to life, shattering the quiet. All units, structural collapse at Riverside Apartments, 400 Clearwater Drive, multiple casualties, fire, rescue, and medical responding. All available personnel report immediately. Marcus sat forward, his hand instinctively going to the radio. Titan's head snapped up, ears forward, body tensing with recognition. He knew that tone, that urgency. Something was wrong. Marcus's brother, Daniel, appeared in the doorway, holding a dish towel, his face pale. "That's downtown. That's the building where Sarah Chen lives. She teaches with me at the elementary school, 3rd floor apartment." Marcus was already moving, grabbing his jacket from the back of the chair. His body switched into mission mode without conscious thought. "How old is the building?" "Old. 60s maybe. They kept saying they were going to renovate it, but Daniel trailed off, his voice thick with dread. Marcus clipped the radio to his belt and grabbed his truck keys. Titan was already at the door, tail rigid, eyes locked on Marcus with that intense focus that said he was ready for whatever came next. "I have to go," Marcus said. Daniel nodded, understanding immediately. "Be careful. And if you see Sarah," Marcus didn't wait for him to finish. He was already out the door, boots crunching on the gravel driveway, Titan flowing beside him like a shadow. They moved together with the unconscious synchronization of a team that had faced death together and survived. The drive down the mountain took 8 minutes. The roads were slick with fresh snow, but Marcus drove with controlled urgency, his hands steady on the wheel, his mind already running through scenarios, cataloging resources, identifying threats. Titan sat in the passenger seat, his nose pressed against the window, his breath fogging the glass. He whined once, a low, anxious sound, and Marcus reached over to rest a hand on the dog's neck. "Easy, boy, we're going to work." The word work was a trigger, a command, and Titan's demeanor shifted instantly. The anxiety disappeared, replaced by focused intensity. His training took over, his body language communicating readiness, discipline, purpose. As they descended into Pinewood Ridge, Marcus could see the dust cloud still hanging over the town like a funeral shroud. Emergency lights flashed red and blue through the gray haze. The sound of sirens echoed off the mountains, a discordant symphony of crisis. Marcus parked 2 blocks from the scene, as close as the police barricades would allow. He grabbed a tactical vest from the back of his truck, an old habit he couldn't shake. It held a first aid kit, a flashlight, rope, and a multi-tool. Titan's working harness went on next. The bright orange vest marked K9, Search, and Rescue in bold letters. They moved through the gathering crowd, Marcus showing his military ID to the officer manning the barricade. The young cop, barely 25, took one look at Marcus's posture, at the scars visible on his hands, at the way Titan moved with disciplined purpose, and waved them through without question. The scene that greeted them was chaos barely contained by training and protocol. Fire trucks formed a perimeter around the collapsed building, their hoses already deployed to douse small fires burning in the rubble. Ambulances lined the street, paramedics triaging the walking wounded. Civilians covered in dust and blood stumbled out of the still-standing portions of the building, their faces masks of shock. And at the center of it all, rising like a monument to catastrophe, was the mountain of debris that had once been 32 homes. Fire Chief Raymond Kowalski stood near the command post, a gray-haired man in his late 50s with a face carved by decades of seeing the worst humanity and nature could inflict. He was shouting orders into a radio, coordinating teams, his voice hoarse from breathing dust. Marcus approached, Titan at his heel. "Chief Kowalski." The chief turned, his eyes sweeping over Marcus and then down to Titan. His expression tightened with recognition and something that looked like relief. "Lieutenant Webb, heard you were in town." "Just visiting family. What's the situation?" Kowalski's jaw worked for a moment, his gaze returning to the rubble. "Northwest corner collapsed. We've pulled out 12 survivors so far, 3 critical, 9 with moderate injuries. Structural engineers are saying the rest of the building is unstable. We're evacuating the intact sections now. How many unaccounted for?" The chief's face went gray. 17. Maybe more. We won't know until we get a final roster from the property manager. Marcus felt the familiar cold weight settle in his chest, the combat calm that pushed emotion aside and left only mission focus. "You have search teams in the debris?" "Had them." Kowalski's voice was bitter. "Had to pull them out 20 minutes ago. The engineers said another section could come down any minute. It's too dangerous. We're waiting for heavy equipment to stabilize the structure before we can go back in." "How long?" The chief wouldn't meet his eyes. 2 hours. Maybe 3. Marcus looked at the rubble. 2 hours was a death sentence for anyone trapped in the voids, crushed beneath concrete, bleeding out in the dark. "People," he said quietly, "don't have 3 hours. I know that." "Lieutenant," Kowalski snapped, his frustration bleeding through. But I'm not sending my people into a collapse zone to become casualties themselves. That's protocol. Protocol is written for acceptable losses, Marcus said, his voice flat. I've seen it before. You wait for the engineers, you wait for the equipment, and you pull out bodies instead of survivors. The chief's face flushed with anger, but before he could respond, a new voice cut through the tension. The building is structurally unsound. Any further rescue attempts are suicide. Marcus turned to see a man in his early 40s approaching, wearing an expensive suit beneath a high-visibility vest. He was tall, well-groomed, with the kind of confidence that came from money and authority. His name tag read, Gerald Cortez, Cortez Development. Marcus's eyes narrowed. You're the developer. Gerald Cortez managed the Riverside Apartments for the last 3 years, yes. And I'm telling you, as someone who knows this building's infrastructure, sending anyone into that wreckage is a liability the city cannot afford. Liability, Marcus repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. There are 17 people under that rubble. Cortez's expression didn't change. And sending more people in to die won't save them. The responsible course of action is to wait for proper equipment and control demolition protocols. Chief Kowalski looked between them, his jaw tight. Mr. Cortez has a point, Lieutenant. We can't risk more lives on speculation. It's not speculation, Marcus said. He pointed to Titan. This is a trained search and rescue K-9. Give me 10 minutes in that rubble, and I'll tell you exactly where the survivors are. The dog's too old, Cortez said dismissively. And you're retired military, not a certified rescue specialist. This is a civilian operation with legal implications. You have no authority here. Marcus took a step forward, his posture shifting subtly, the kind of movement that made experienced combat soldiers take notice. Titan, sensing the tension, moved to Marcus's side. His body rigid, his eyes locked on Cortez with an intensity that made the developer step back involuntarily. I don't need authority, Marcus said quietly. I need 10 minutes and a chance to save lives. You can explain your legal implications to the families of the people who die while we're standing here debating. Kowalski held up a hand. Lieutenant, I understand your frustration, but a new sound cut through the argument. Faint, almost lost beneath the rumble of diesel engines and shouting voices. A scratching sound, rhythmic and desperate, coming from somewhere deep within the rubble. Titan's head snapped toward the sound, his ears rotated forward, locking onto the source. A low whine escaped his throat, and he pulled against his lead, his body language screaming alert. Target acquired. Permission to engage. Marcus dropped to one knee, his hand on Titan's shoulder, feeling the dog's muscles quivering with restraint. You hear that, boy? The scratching came again, louder this time. 3 short bursts, a pause, then 3 more. SOS. Someone in that rubble was alive, conscious, and trying to signal for help. There, Marcus said, pointing to a section of debris about 40 feet from where they stood. Someone's alive in there. Kowalski pulled out binoculars, scanning the area Marcus indicated. His face went pale. Dear God, that's under the heaviest section of the collapse. All the more reason to move now, Marcus said, standing. Before it shifts again, Cortez stepped forward, his voice sharp. Absolutely not. I'm exercising my authority as the property owner to forbid unauthorized personnel from entering the collapse zone. Chief Kowalski, if you allow this man to proceed, I will hold the city liable for any consequences. The chief's face was a battleground of competing obligations. Duty to save lives, duty to protect his people, duty to follow protocol, and the cold reality of lawsuits and career consequences. Marcus watched him struggle, and in that moment he made his decision. He unclipped Titan's lead. Titan, search. The command was quiet, but absolute. Titan exploded into motion, his powerful hindquarters driving him forward, weaving through the debris field with the sure-footed grace of an animal bred and trained for exactly this kind of chaos. Lieutenant Webb, stop! Kowalski shouted, but Marcus was already moving, following Titan into the rubble. Behind him, he heard Cortez yelling, Chief, I'm ordering you to arrest that man. He has no authority to Marcus. didn't hear the rest. He was already in the debris field, his boots finding purchase on broken concrete, his hands gripping twisted rebar for balance. Titan was 20 feet ahead, moving with purpose, his nose working the air currents, reading the invisible map of scent that told him where life persisted in the tomb of collapsed architecture. The scratching sound came again, weaker this time. Titan barked once, sharp and clear. The signal, target located. Marcus scrambled over a jagged pile of broken brick, his injured shoulder screaming in protest. He ignored it, pushing through the pain, his entire focus on the dog and the faint sound of someone fighting to stay alive beneath tons of concrete. He reached Titan's position and dropped to his knees. The dog was pawing at a gap between two massive concrete slabs, his body quivering with urgency. Marcus pulled his flashlight from his vest and shone it into the darkness. Two eyes stared back at him. Small, wide with terror, set in a dust-covered face that couldn't have been more than 8 years old. A child, a little girl, trapped in a void space barely large enough to hold her. And in that moment, as Marcus locked eyes with that terrified child, every protocol, every legal threat, every ounce of bureaucratic caution became meaningless. There was only the mission. There was only the girl. There was only the scratching in the dark and the promise that no one gets left behind. Marcus heard the shouts behind him growing louder, heard Chief Kowalski ordering his firefighters to pull back, heard Gerald Cortez's voice rising in indignant rage. But those sounds belonged to a different world, a world of liability and protocol and acceptable losses. Marcus belonged to the world of the girl, trapped in the dark. He keyed his radio without looking away from those terrified eyes. "Chief, I have a visual on a survivor, female, approximately 8 years old, conscious and alert. She's in a void space beneath two concrete slabs, approximately 4 feet down." The radio crackled with static, then Kowalski's voice, tight with conflicted emotion. "Webb, the engineers are saying that section could collapse at any moment. You need to pull back now." "Negative," Marcus said calmly. "I'm not leaving her." Titan had pressed his body flat against the gap, his head lowered, and the girl inside the void reached up with one small, dust-covered hand. Her fingers brushed against the dog's muzzle, a connection that transcended species, a lifeline thrown between the living and the nearly dead. Marcus shifted position, assessing the debris field with tactical precision. The two concrete slabs were from the 3rd and 4th floors, massive sections of floor that had fallen nearly intact. The void space between them was maybe 3 feet high, just enough room for the girl to have survived the initial collapse. But the slabs were resting on precarious support, held up by a tangle of twisted rebar and fractured brick. One wrong movement, one shift in weight distribution, and the whole thing would collapse inward, crushing the void space and everything in it. "Hey, sweetheart," Marcus said, his voice dropping into the calm, steady tone he used in hostage negotiations and combat operations. "My name is Marcus. What's your name?" The girl's lips moved, but her voice was barely a whisper. "Emma." "Okay, Emma. That's a beautiful name. I'm going to get you out of here. But I need you to be really brave for me. Can you do that?" She nodded, her eyes never leaving his face. Titan whined softly and licked the girl's fingers, a gesture of reassurance that made her lips twitch in something that might have been the ghost of a smile. "Is anyone else in there with you?" Marcus asked. Emma's face crumpled. "Mommy was here, but she's not moving anymore." The tears started then, cutting tracks through the dust on her cheeks. Marcus felt the familiar cold rage settle in his gut, the anger at the unfairness of it all, at the bureaucrats who valued protocol over lives, at the developers who cut corners, and the engineers who signed off on unsafe buildings, and the entire corrupt system that led to children being buried alive while their mothers died beside them. But rage was a luxury he couldn't afford right now. Rage was for later, for the reckoning that would come when Emma was safe. "Okay, Emma," Marcus said gently. "I need you to stay very still. Don't try to move. I'm going to make this hole bigger so we can get you out." Behind him, footsteps crunched on broken concrete. Marcus turned to see Chief Kowalski approaching, his face grim but resigned. 2 firefighters followed, carrying rope and hand tools. "You're a stubborn son of a bitch," Kowalski muttered. "But you were right. We can't leave her." Marcus nodded once, a gesture of respect between men who understood the weight of impossible choices. "What do we have for stabilization?" "Not much," one of the firefighters said, a young woman with short blonde hair and soot-streaked face. Her name tape read Santos. "We can try to shore up the slabs with rescue struts, but there's no good anchor points. The whole structure is compromised." "Then we work fast," Marcus said. Santos set up a belay system using that support column. "I'm going in to extract her manually." "Lieutenant, that void is barely big enough for the girl," Kowalski protested. "You'll never fit." Marcus was already shrugging out of his tactical vest, stripping down to his t-shirt, despite the November cold. Titan had managed to maintain contact with Emma, his presence keeping her calm, keeping her focused on something other than the crushing weight of concrete and the silence of her mother. "I'll fit," Marcus said. He looked at Titan. "Guard." The dog understood instantly. He shifted position, placing himself between Emma and the outside world, his body language communicating protection, safety, promise. If anything shifted, if the concrete began to move, Titan would know before the humans did, and his warning would buy them precious seconds. Marcus lay flat on the broken ground and began to snake his way into the gap. The opening was barely 18 inches wide, forcing him to exhale completely, to squeeze his shoulders through. Jagged rebar caught at his shirt, and he felt the fabric tear, felt the metal score across his scarred back, but he pushed forward. The void space was a nightmare of confined darkness. His flashlight beam cut through, swirling dust, illuminating the horror of Emma's prison. She was wedged between a fallen concrete slab above and a pile of broken brick below. To her right, partially buried beneath rubble, was the body of a woman in her 30s, her face turned away, her arms stretched out toward her daughter in a final gesture of protection. Marcus's throat tightened. "Not now. Grieve later. Mission first." "Hey, Emma," he said softly, forcing warmth into his voice. "I'm right here. I'm going to reach out and take your hand, okay?" She nodded, her small fingers stretching toward him. Their hands met in the darkness, and Marcus felt the tremor running through her body, the shock and terror and exhaustion of a child who had been fighting for life for over an hour. "You're doing so good," he told her. "So brave. Your mom would be so proud of you." The words almost broke him, but he held it together. He had to. Outside the void, Marcus heard the sound of metal on metal as Santos and the other firefighters set up the rescue struts. Chief Kowalski's voice came through the radio, calm but urgent. "Webb, engineering is reporting micro-tremors in the foundation. We might have another shift incoming. You need to expedite." "Copy," Marcus said. He looked at Emma. "Sweetheart, I need to move you. It's going to be tight and it might hurt a little, but I promise I'll be as gentle as I can." "Do you trust me?" Emma's voice was small but clear. "Yes." Marcus braced himself against the concrete slab above him, feeling the massive weight pressing down, feeling the subtle vibrations of instability running through the structure. He had extracted wounded soldiers from collapsed buildings in Afghanistan, had pulled civilians from earthquake rubble in Haiti, had trained for scenarios exactly like this. But every time, it was different. Every time, the fear was new, the stakes unbearably high, the margin for error measured in heartbeats. He slid one arm beneath Emma's shoulders, the other beneath her knees. Her small body was rigid with fear and pain. "Easy," he murmured. "I've got you. On 3, okay? 1, 2, 3. He pulled, smooth and steady, drawing her out of the void space toward the opening. Emma whimpered, but didn't cry out. Her mother had raised a fighter. The concrete slab groaned, a deep bass note of shifting weight. Dust rained down from above. Titan barked sharply, the warning signal. Marcus's combat instincts took over. He didn't speed up, didn't panic. He maintained the same smooth, controlled movement, pulling Emma through the debris field, his body shielding hers from falling dust and small rocks that broke free from the unstable ceiling. "Almost there," he said. "Just a few more feet." The gap narrowed ahead of them, a bottleneck where a fallen beam partially blocked the exit. Marcus would have to turn sideways, would have to push Emma ahead of him, would have to make himself smaller than physics said he could be. He shifted Emma in his arms, cradling her against his chest. Then he exhaled completely, collapsing his ribcage, and drove forward into the narrow space. The beam caught on his injured shoulder. White-hot pain exploded through his back, the old shrapnel wound screaming protest, but he pushed through, feeling skin tear, feeling blood soak into his shirt. And then they were through. Chief Kowalski's hands reached into the gap, pulling Emma free. Santos grabbed Marcus's arms, hauling him out into the gray November daylight. Marcus rolled onto his back, breathing hard, pain radiating from his shoulder in nauseating waves. Titan was instantly there, pressing against his side, the dog's warm body solid and real and grounding. Paramedics swarmed Emma, wrapping her in thermal blankets, checking her vitals, loading her onto a stretcher. She fought them weakly, her eyes searching the crowd until they found Marcus. Their gazes locked for one brief moment across the chaos of the rescue scene. Emma raised one small hand in a wave, and Marcus managed a tired smile, and a salute in return. Then she was being carried away toward the ambulances, and Marcus let his head fall back against the cold concrete, exhaustion crashing over him like a physical wave. Chief Kowalski crouched beside him. "That was the stupidest, most reckless thing I've ever seen." Marcus managed a weak laugh. But you saved her life," Kowalski finished quietly. "So, thank you." Before Marcus could respond, a new voice cut through the moment, sharp and furious. "I want that man arrested immediately." Gerald Cortez stood at the edge of the debris field, his expensive suit covered in dust, his face flushed with rage. He was flanked by two men in security uniforms, both built like bodyguards, both wearing the expression of people paid to enforce authority without asking questions. Chief Kowalski stood slowly, positioning himself between Marcus and Cortez. On what grounds? Trespassing, interfering with a disaster response, reckless endangerment, Cortez rattled off. He ignored a lawful order from the property owner and nearly caused a secondary collapse. "I want him arrested and charged." Marcus pushed himself to sitting, wincing as his shoulder protested. Titan moved to stand in front of him, the dog's posture protective, his lips pulling back slightly to expose teeth. "You want to arrest me for saving a child's life?" Marcus's voice was quiet, but it carried an edge that made Santos and the other firefighters turn to watch. "I want you arrested for violating safety protocols and putting emergency responders at risk," Cortez shot back. "You had no authority to enter that debris field. You could have triggered a collapse that killed everyone here." "But I didn't," Marcus said, climbing slowly to his feet. Titan moved with him, staying close, ready to intervene if the situation escalated. "I saved Emma, and if you'd had your way, she'd still be in there, dying while you waited for your engineers and your lawyers to decide what was acceptable." The crowd of firefighters and paramedics had grown quiet, watching the confrontation. Marcus could see it in their faces, the barely concealed anger at Cortez's words, the recognition that Marcus had done what they had all wanted to do but couldn't. Cortez's face reddened further. "This isn't about one child, it's about following proper procedures to prevent greater loss of life." "No," Marcus said, his voice rising for the first time, the combat edge creeping into his tone. "It's about you covering your ass. You knew this building was unsafe, you knew those support structures were compromised, and you did nothing because fixing them would have cut into your profits." "That's a baseless accusation," Cortez snapped. But his eyes flickered, just for a moment, a tell that Marcus had spent years learning to read in interrogations and negotiations. Chief Kowalski stepped forward, his hand raised. "Gentlemen, this isn't the time or place. We still have 17 people unaccounted for, and a building that could come down at any moment. Mr. Cortez, I appreciate your concerns, but Lieutenant Webb's actions resulted in a successful rescue. We can discuss the legal implications later." "There's nothing to discuss," Cortez said coldly. "I'm calling my attorney and filing a formal complaint with the city council. This kind of cowboy heroics creates liability that this town cannot afford. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more incredible true stories of courage and loyalty. He turned and stalked away, his security detail trailing behind him like malevolent shadows. As he passed through the crowd of emergency responders, Marcus saw something in their faces: contempt, disgust. The look that good people give to bad people who hide behind lawyers and protocols instead of doing the right thing. Santos approached Marcus, a first aid kit in her hands. "Let me take a look at that shoulder." Marcus started to waver off, but Kowalski's stern look stopped him. He sat on a chunk of broken concrete while Santos cleaned and bandaged the gash on his back where the rebar had torn through skin. "You're going to need stitches," she said quietly. "And probably a tetanus shot. Add it to the collection," Marcus muttered. Titan pressed against his leg, and Marcus rested one hand on the dog's head, drawing comfort from the familiar presence. While Santos worked, Marcus watched the ongoing rescue operation. More heavy equipment was arriving now, cranes and excavators that would carefully dismantle the unstable sections of the building. But every minute that passed was a minute that survivors beneath the rubble had less oxygen, less time, less hope. "Chief," Marcus said, looking up at Kowalski, "let me and Titan do another sweep. We can identify survivor locations faster than your equipment can dig." Kowalski's expression was pained. "Webb, I want to say yes. God knows you've proven yourself." But Cortez wasn't entirely wrong. The liability issues are real. If something happens to you in there, it's my department that takes the fall. Marcus stood, testing his shoulder. The pain was manageable, a dull throb rather than the sharp agony of a few minutes ago. "So, give me civilian volunteer status. I'm not on your payroll, I'm not following your orders. I'm just a guy with a trained dog offering to help." The chief opened his mouth to respond, but was interrupted by a commotion near one of the ambulances. A woman's voice rose above the general noise, sharp with panic. "My daughter! Has anyone seen my daughter? Her name is Emma Chen. She's 8 years old, third-floor apartment." Marcus turned to see a woman in her 30s pushing through the crowd, her face streaked with tears. She wore hospital scrubs and a name tag that read, "Sarah Chen, RN, Daniel's colleague." "Emma's aunt." "Over here," Marcus called, raising his hand. Sarah's head snapped toward him, and she broke into a run, stumbling over debris until she reached the ambulances. The paramedics guided her to the stretcher where Emma lay bundled in blankets, and the reunion was immediate and devastating. "Emma, oh my God, Emma, Aunt Sarah," the little girl's voice was hoarse but strong, and she reached up with both arms as her aunt gathered her close, sobbing openly. Marcus watched the reunion from a distance, feeling the familiar ache in his chest, the weight of all the people he hadn't been able to save, balanced against the fragile miracle of the ones he had. Titan leaned against him, a solid presence, and Marcus buried his fingers in the dog's fur. "Good boy," he murmured. "You did good." From the corner of his eye, Marcus saw Sarah Chen approach, Emma's small hand clutched in hers. The woman's face was raw with emotion, her eyes red-rimmed, but when she looked at Marcus, her expression shifted to something approaching reverence. "You," she said, her voice breaking. "You pulled her out." Marcus nodded, suddenly uncomfortable with the intensity of her gratitude. He could feel every firefighter and paramedic watching, could feel the weight of their attention. "Titan helped," he said quietly. "He's the one who found her." Sarah dropped to her knees, her free hand reaching out to Titan. The dog, sensing her emotional state, moved closer, allowing her to wrap one arm around his neck while she held Emma with the other. "Thank you," Sarah whispered, her face buried in Titan's fur. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Emma looked up at Marcus, her gray eyes enormous in her dust-covered face. "You saved me," she said simply, "just like a superhero." Marcus crouched down to her level, his scarred hands resting on his knees. "Not a superhero," he said gently. "Just someone who couldn't walk away. You're the brave one, Emma. You held on when it would have been easier to give up." Her face crumpled. Mommy didn't hold on. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He glanced at Sarah, saw the grief and understanding in her face. She knew. The paramedics would have told her. "Your mom loved you very much," Marcus said, his voice rough. "The last thing she did was protect you. She made sure you were in that void space where you'd be safe. She saved your life, Emma. Don't ever forget that." The little girl nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks, and Sarah pulled her close again, whispering words of comfort that Marcus couldn't hear. Chief Kowalski appeared at Marcus's shoulder. "Webb," he said quietly, "we just got word from the structural engineers. They're giving us a 2-hour window to do a final sweep before they have to bring down the rest of the building. If you and Titan are serious about helping, now's the time." Marcus straightened, his hand automatically going to check Titan's harness. The dog's ears pricked forward, his body language shifting from comfort mode to work mode in an instant. "We're serious," Marcus said. "Then let's find the rest of them." The next 2 hours were a blur of debris and determination, of following Titan through the wreckage as the dog's extraordinary nose picked up the faint scent signatures of life amid the overwhelming smell of destruction. They found Mr. Patterson, a 72-year-old veteran, trapped in his first-floor apartment, his legs pinned beneath a fallen refrigerator. Titan's persistent barking led Santos and her team to his location, and they extracted him with hydraulic rescue tools while Marcus kept him conscious by swapping war stories from different generations of conflict. They found the Martinez family, mother, father, and 2 teenage sons, huddled in a bathtub that had somehow survived the collapse intact, surrounded by rubble but protected by the cast-iron tub's sturdy construction. The sons, 17 and 15, had kept their parents calm by singing every song they could remember from their childhood, their voices hoarse but unbroken. They found college student Aisha Johnson trapped beneath her desk, using the shelter-in-place technique she'd learned in an earthquake drill. When Titan found her, she was reciting poetry to stay conscious, her voice barely a whisper, but her spirit unbreakable. Each rescue was its own small miracle, its own victory against the mathematics of tragedy. But between each success were the failures, the voids that held only silence, the scent trails that led to bodies instead of survivors. Marcus pushed through, his body running on adrenaline and muscle memory, his injured shoulder a constant throb that he learned to ignore. Titan worked with tireless focus, his training and instincts guiding them through impossible terrain. By the time the 2-hour window expired, they had located 9 additional survivors and confirmed 8 fatalities. The rescue teams worked with desperate efficiency, knowing that every minute counted, that lives hung in the balance measured by seconds. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed obscene against the gray devastation, Chief Kowalski called a halt to the operation. "That's it," he said, his voice carrying across the debris field. "Engineering says we're out of time. Everyone out. Now." Marcus stood at the edge of the collapse zone, Titan panting heavily at his side. The dog's paws were bloodied from the rough terrain, his coat matted with dust and debris, but his tail was still high, his posture still alert. He would have kept going if Marcus asked him to. "You did good, boy," Marcus murmured, kneeling to check Titan's injuries. "Real good." Behind them, the last of the rescue teams were pulling out, their faces etched with exhaustion and the complicated emotions of success and failure intertwined. They had saved 17 people. They had recovered 8 bodies. 9 people remained unaccounted for, their fate uncertain, likely trapped in sections of the building too unstable to reach. Marcus felt the familiar weight of survivor's guilt settling over him like a lead blanket. 17 saved, but 9 still missing. 9 families that would wait through the night for news that might never come, or might come in the worst possible form. Webb. He looked up to see Chief Kowalski approaching, followed by a man in his 60s wearing a suit that marked him as someone important. The man had silver hair, sharp eyes, and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Lieutenant Webb, this is Mayor Richard Drummond," Kowalski said. Marcus stood, wincing as his shoulder protested. Titan moved to his side, protective even in his exhaustion. "Mayor," Marcus said with a slight nod. Mayor Drummond extended his hand, and Marcus shook it, noting the firm grip, the calluses that suggested the man had done manual labor in his past. "I wanted to thank you personally, Lieutenant," the mayor said. "Your actions today saved lives. Chief Kowalski has briefed me on the situation with Mr. Cortez and his threats of legal action. I want you to know that you have the full support of this administration. We don't punish heroes in Pinewood Ridge." "I appreciate that, sir," Marcus said. "But I didn't do anything that any decent person wouldn't have done." The mayor's eyes crinkled with something that might have been amusement. "That's where you're wrong, son. Plenty of people would have walked away, would have followed protocol, would have waited for permission. You didn't, and that makes all the difference." He glanced down at Titan. "Hell of a dog you've got there. Best partner I've ever had," Marcus said, his hand resting on Titan's head. The mayor was silent for a moment, watching the last rays of sunlight fade behind the mountains. Then he turned back to Marcus, his expression growing serious. "I need to ask you something, Lieutenant. Off the record." "Sir? We're going to be investigating the cause of this collapse," the mayor said. "The engineers will do their assessment, the city inspectors will file their reports. But I've been mayor of this town for 12 years, and I know when something smells wrong. Cortez Development has been renovating buildings all over Pinewood Ridge for the past 5 years, and this is the third structural incident we've had. The other 2 were ruled accidental, but the pattern is concerning." Marcus's combat instincts tingled, the sense that there was more going on beneath the surface. "You think the collapses weren't accidental?" "I think," the mayor said carefully, "that when money and safety intersect, sometimes corners get cut. And I think Gerald Cortez is the kind of man who cares more about profit margins than he does about the people living in his buildings." Chief Kowalski shifted uncomfortably. "Mayor, we should wait for the official investigation before." "I'm not asking for an official investigation," Drummond interrupted. "I'm asking a combat veteran with good instincts if he noticed anything unusual while he was in that rubble." Marcus thought back to the debris field, to the way the concrete had fractured, to the twisted rebar and the pattern of the collapse. He was no engineer, but he had seen enough destroyed buildings in war zones to recognize certain patterns. "The support structure failed catastrophically and simultaneously," Marcus said slowly. "In combat zones, we see that kind of failure when load-bearing columns are deliberately weakened. It's a demolition pattern, not a natural structural failure." The mayor and the chief exchanged glances. "That's what I was afraid you'd say," Drummond muttered. Before anyone could continue, a commotion erupted near the command post. Raised voices, the crackle of radios, and then a young deputy came running toward them. "Chief, Mayor, you need to see this." They followed the deputy to where a fire investigator was crouched near the base of the collapsed section, examining something with a flashlight. As they approached, the investigator looked up, his face grim. "What have you got, Hanson?" Kowalski asked. The investigator stood, holding a section of rebar in his gloved hands. The metal was about 2 feet long, and even to Marcus's untrained eye, something looked wrong with it. "This is from one of the main support columns," Hanson said. "Look at the core." He tilted the rebar so the light caught it at an ohm angle. Where the metal had fractured, the interior was strangely porous, almost honeycomb-like. "That's not normal steel composition," Hanson continued. "This looks like it's been compromised, either by corrosion or by substitution with substandard materials." "Substandard materials?" the mayor repeated, his voice deadly quiet. "Cheap rebar from overseas," Hanson explained. "It looks like steel, tests like steel in basic inspections, but under sustained load, it fails catastrophically. We've seen it in construction fraud cases before. Someone buys cheap materials, pockets the difference, and hopes the building doesn't fall down before they sell it." Marcus felt cold rage building in his gut, the same anger he'd felt in war zones when insurgents used civilians as shields, when corrupt officials diverted aid meant for orphans, when evil hid behind bureaucracy and profit margins. "Can you prove it?" he asked. Hanson nodded. "We'll need to do metallurgical analysis, but I'd bet my certification that this rebar isn't up to code." And if one support column used substandard materials, then they all probably did, Kowalski finished, his face ashen. The mayor's jaw worked for a moment. How many other buildings has Cortez Development renovated in this town? At least 15, maybe 20, the chief said. Apartments, mixed-use buildings, even the new library extension. We need to inspect every single one, Drummond said. Tonight. And I want Gerald Cortez brought in for questioning immediately. As if summoned by his name, a black sedan pulled up to the police barricade. Gerald Cortez emerged, but this time he wasn't alone. He was flanked by 2 men in expensive suits, clearly lawyers, and behind them came a news crew with cameras already rolling. "Oh, hell," Kowalski muttered. Cortez approached with the confidence of a man who believed money and lawyers could solve any problem. The cameras followed him like pilotfish trailing a shark. "Mayor Drummond, I'm here to formally protest the reckless actions of Lieutenant Webb and to demand accountability for today's violations of safety protocol." The mayor's expression didn't change. "Mr. Cortez, I'm going to need you to come down to City Hall to answer some questions about the construction materials used in the Riverside Apartments renovation." Cortez's confident expression flickered. "That's a matter for my company's legal department. It's a matter of criminal investigation," the mayor said, his voice hard. "We have evidence suggesting the use of substandard materials in load-bearing structures. 9 people are missing, 8 are confirmed dead, and if our preliminary findings are correct, their deaths are the result of criminal negligence at best and deliberate fraud at worst." The cameras were rolling, capturing every word. Marcus saw Cortez's face go pale beneath his artificial tan, saw the telltale signs of a man whose carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble. "I have no idea what you're talking about," Cortez said, but his voice lacked conviction. "My company has followed all building codes and safety regulations." "Then you won't mind answering questions under oath," the mayor replied. One of Cortez's lawyers stepped forward. "Our client will cooperate fully with any legitimate investigation, but we want to be clear that these accusations are premature and potentially libelous. We will be filing a countersuit against the city for damages to Mr. Cortez's reputation." "File whatever you want," Mayor Drummond said coldly. "But your client isn't leaving this site until he's been formally questioned. Chief?" Kowalski stepped forward, his hand resting on his duty belt. "Mr. Cortez, I need you to come with me." For a long moment, it looked like Cortez might refuse. His security detail tensed, his lawyers started to protest, and the cameras captured it all. Marcus moved closer, Titan at his side, the dog's presence a silent promise of what would happen if Cortez tried to run. Then the fight went out of the developer. His shoulders sagged, his confident mask slipping to reveal something that might have been fear or might have been resignation. "Fine," he said quietly. "But I want my lawyers present for any questioning." "Of course," Kowalski said. He gestured to 2 deputies who moved to escort Cortez toward a waiting patrol car. As they led him away, Cortez's gaze fell on Marcus. The hatred in his eyes was palpable, but beneath it was something else. Recognition. The acknowledgement that Marcus had been right, that the girl's rescue had opened a door that Cortez had desperately wanted to keep closed. "This isn't over," Cortez said quietly as he passed. Marcus met his gaze without flinching. "For those 8 people who died today, it's just beginning." The news crews swarmed as Cortez was placed in the patrol car, their cameras flashing, their questions overlapping in an incomprehensible babble. Mayor Drummond waved them off and turned to Marcus. "You should probably get that shoulder looked at," he said, "and get some rest. Something tells me the next few days are going to be complicated." Marcus nodded, feeling the exhaustion finally catching up with him. Titan leaned heavily against his leg, the dog's energy finally depleted. "Thank you, Lieutenant," the mayor said, extending his hand again. "What you did today matters. Don't let anyone tell you different." They shook, and Marcus felt the weight of the man's gratitude, the unspoken acknowledgement that sometimes doing the right thing meant breaking the rules, meant ignoring protocol, meant trusting instinct over bureaucracy. As the mayor walked away, Sarah Chen approached, still holding Emma's hand. The little girl looked up at Marcus with those impossibly large gray eyes. "We're going to stay with my parents tonight," Sarah said, but Emma wanted to say goodbye to her hero. "Not a hero," Marcus said gently, crouching down to Emma's level one more time. "Just a soldier who heard someone calling for help." Emma let go of her aunt's hand and wrapped her arms around Marcus's neck, her small body trembling. He held her carefully, mindful of her injuries, feeling the rapid beat of her heart against his chest. "I won't forget you," she whispered. "Ever." "I won't forget you either," Marcus promised. "You're the bravest person I met today." She pulled back, smiled through her tears, and then crouched down to hug Titan. The dog, despite his exhaustion, nuzzled her gently, his tail wagging slowly. "Goodbye, Titan," Emma said. "Thank you for finding me." Then Sarah was leading her away toward a waiting car, and Marcus was left standing in the fading light, surrounded by the ruins of the Riverside Apartments, feeling the weight of the day settling into his bones. "Come on, boy," he said to Titan. "Let's go home." They walked slowly back to Marcus's truck, navigating through the maze of emergency vehicles and equipment. News crews tried to intercept them, but Marcus waved them off without comment. He had nothing to say to cameras, no statement to make. The work spoke for itself. The drive back up the mountain was quiet. Titan lay on the passenger seat, his breathing deep and even already asleep. Marcus drove on autopilot, his mind replaying the day's events, analyzing decisions, second-guessing choices, wondering if he could have moved faster, worked smarter, saved one more person. It was full dark by the time he pulled into his brother's driveway. Daniel was sitting on the porch, wrapped in a jacket, a mug of something hot steaming in his hands. He stood as Marcus killed the engine. "Saw the news," Daniel said as Marcus approached. "They're calling you a hero." Marcus shook his head. "Just did what needed doing." They embraced, the kind of fierce hug that brothers who've both served give each other, a communication of pride and relief and understanding that needs no words. "Sarah called me," Daniel said when they pulled apart. "Told me you saved Emma. I don't have words, Marcus." "You don't need them," Marcus said. He sank into the other chair on the porch, his body finally allowing itself to acknowledge the pain and exhaustion. Titan climbed out of the truck and limped onto the porch, collapsing at Marcus's feet with a contented sigh. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the stars emerge one by one over the dark silhouettes of the mountains. Inside the cabin, warmth and light waited, food and rest, and the ordinary comforts of civilian life. But out there in the darkness, Marcus knew that other battles were just beginning. The investigation into Cortez development, the lawsuits and countersuits, the political fallout, the families of the missing waiting for news that might never come or might come too late. "You going to stick around for all of this?" Daniel asked quietly. Marcus looked down at Titan, at the scars on the dog's coat, at the bandaged paws, and the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Partners, brothers in arms. Warriors without a war, who had found their mission in the ruins of a collapsed building. "Yeah," Marcus said, "I think we are." Because sometimes the most important battles weren't fought with guns and explosives. Sometimes they were fought with determination and truth, with the willingness to stand up against corruption and greed, with the courage to do the right thing even when it cost you everything. And sometimes the greatest victories came not from destroying the enemy, but from saving the innocent, from pulling one small girl out of the darkness and giving her back her future. From hearing the scratching in the rubble and refusing to walk away, the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. The mountains stood eternal and unchanging. And on a porch in Pinewood Ridge, a warrior and his dog rested, their mission complete for now, but ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. Because heroes, Marcus had learned, weren't the people who sought glory or recognition. Heroes were the people who showed up when everyone else had walked away, who answered the call when it would have been easier to ignore it, who believed that one life saved was worth any risk, any sacrifice, any consequence. And in that quiet moment, with his brother beside him and his partner at his feet, Marcus Webb finally understood what his years of service had been preparing him for. Not the wars overseas, not the medals or commendations, but for the moment when a little girl needed someone to hear her scratching in the dark, and for the courage to never ever stop listening. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that heroes still exist. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments, what was your favorite moment? Was it the K-9's loyalty, the SEAL's protection, or the moment justice was served? We read every comment. God bless, and see you in the next story.